Today we're going to talk about how to get an introvert X back after a breakup. Specifically, I'm going to highlight our generalized game plan that we give to our average client who wants to get an X back, and then show you how you would potentially alter it if you determine that your X is an introvert. This means we're going to be covering things like the value ladder for introverts, the major differences between introverts and extroverts, if attachment styles have any correlation between the introvert temperament, and the importance of alone time for an introvert. So let's just dive right in. So if you've identified your X as an introvert and you're interested in getting them back, then usually the journey will start with a concept that I like to call the value ladder. Now, if you are familiar with our website, our work, our programs, then you know that the value ladder is something I recommend to all our clients interested in getting their X's back. And the beauty of it is I designed it in a way so that it can act almost as a universal crutch you can fall back on no matter what situation you find yourself in. And yes, that means if you want your X back, if you want to get over your ex, if you want to get a new romantic partner to commit to you, it can be used. And often where people get tripped up through it is when their situation tends to be a bit more unique. Oftentimes we'll have people comment on our website or on our private Facebook group or on YouTube talking about how their situation is unique, how it's different from everyone else's. For example, what if you're going through a breakup and you find yourself in any of the following situations? You're going through a long distance breakup. You cheated or your ex cheated. You are blocked. They're dating someone new. In those cases, the value ladder will slightly need to be altered. Notice I say altered and not changed. Being in a situation where you are trying to get an introvert back requires a similar alteration, but not changes to the overall strategy. So our journey with introverts starts really first with understanding the concept of the value ladder. Now, I've written gigantic, massive guides completely dedicated to understanding and breaking down the value ladder for you. But if you want the quick Cliff Notes version, the value ladder is essentially a step-by-step process for reestablishing contact with an ex and communicating in a way that makes reconciliation more likely by strategically making your ex recognize your value for themselves. In a nutshell, that's what it is. And the beauty is there are a total of usually like 5 to 6 steps in the value ladder. You have sort of the start with the no contact rule, then you have the texting phase, then you have the phone call phase, then you have the meetup phase, and then you have the dating phase, and then finally the ask phase. And the goal is really comically simple. Your job is to slowly climb the ladder so that you're building value with them throughout each of these phases. So you do a no contact rule where there's no contact at all. Focus is supposed to be on yourself. You're supposed to outgrow your ex. Get to that mindset emotionally, internally, where you're not really wanting them back anymore, but you're just going to try to see if you can get them back. That's usually the best place to be in before you enter the texting phase. And then the texting phase happens. You're talking to your ex. You're building value there. After you've built enough value, climb to the next rung, the phone call phase, and so on and so forth. Now, what we need to do is understand what is different when you're dating an introvert or trying to get one back. Pretty much none of the core concepts need to get changed. And that's something I want to get through your head right away. A lot of people think because their ex is an introvert that they need to completely redo the value ladder. The ultimate thing you need to understand is the alterations we're going to make are more stylistic than anything else. But in order to understand the alterations that we're going to be making, I need to teach you about the major differences between introverts and extroverts. Once we have that understanding, then we'll swoop back around and quote unquote update the value ladder concept. So what are some of the major differences between introverts and extroverts? Well, Carl Jung, famed Swiss psychiatrist, probably has my favorite quote on introverts and extroverts ever. Here's the quote. Introverts turn to their own minds to recharge, while extroverts seek out other people for their energy needs. This, in a nutshell, describes how extroverts and introverts operate. Generally speaking, people who are introverts are likely to be very thought-oriented. They'll seek out depth and knowledge. They'll prefer deeper, more substance-based interactions. They'll crave solitude. Now compare that to extroverts, who tend to be action-oriented, prefer frequent interaction with others, be looked at as extremely social, prefer to work with teams. One of the things that I've noticed from our success stories is that, generally speaking, looking at X's in terms of extroverts and introverts can sometimes give us a clue at how long the entire recovery process will take. Most of our quicker success stories have X's who tended to be extroverted, while the longer ones have X's that tended to be introverted. So at first, my initial thought was pointing out a potential connection between introversion and avoidant attachment styles, but it's important to look at this distinction between the two. Real quick, I want to say that if you're new to this YouTube channel, or you're trying to figure out what you should be doing to get your X back, and you're trying to learn if you even have a chance in your specific circumstance, probably the smartest thing for you to do is actually stop by our website, www.xboyfriendrecovery.com, or take our X Recovery Chances quiz that can be found at xboyfriendrecovery.com. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, taking that free quiz is super easy to do. All you have to simply do is look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. It will take you directly to the quiz where you can fill it out and get an easy answer on what you should be doing going forward, and overall what your chances look like in your specific situation. All right, so let's get you back to the video. If you've been watching any of my YouTube videos recently, you notice I've been taking a very keen interest on the avoidant attachment style in relation to breakups. Well, one of the things that you need to really understand is it's really easy to get the avoidant attachment style and the introverted sort of temperament mixed up. Both appear to be inward-seeking people who value self-sufficiency and independence, but there's a more important distinction that we really need to make. So I've been talking a lot about avoidant attachment styles lately, and I'd recommend watching some of my previous videos if you're confused about what they are. But in a nutshell, someone with an avoidant attachment style values their own independence and self-sufficiency above all else. So they often sabotage their own relationships in an effort to retain it, especially when you're getting kind of close. So how is that different than an introvert? Well, according to the website Avalon Malibu, an introverted personality is a shy or introverted person that still tries to face situations that generate discomfort. The situation may be unpleasant, yet the person tries to convey the message that they are enjoying it. They desire to integrate socially, and it's sufficient to overcome their preference of being alone. So the key here to understand is the person with an introverted personality does not feel anxiety when it is necessary to maintain social contact. Compare that to the avoidant personality disorder. A person with the avoidant attachment style has given up on facing situations that generate fear as much as humanly possible. They avoid any anxiety-generating situation and do everything possible not to be noticed. So the key thing to understand here is the person with avoidant attachment style issues will feel an overwhelming amount of anxiety and fear that will severely disrupt or prevent their social contacts. But what's interesting is I think this is a fascinating thread to pull on. So most people researching this aren't looking specifically at breakups like we have. And while I will be the first to say to you that you need to take what I'm about to say next with a grain of salt, it's simply my hypothesis, and I think there might be some merit to it, but it's still a hypothesis. So here it is. I personally believe that many of our clients' exes who are classified as avoidant have more introverted personalities. So there's an interesting overlap to explore here. Essentially, most breakups that we are seeing are with men or women who exhibit both introverted qualities as well as avoidant ones. Of course, I do like to do my own internal research and compare that to what else I can find to back up my assertion. So I went off on a quest. I started first by finding out if most of my clients classified themselves as introverts or extroverts. Interestingly, most of my clients overwhelmingly considered themselves introverted in the limited amount of time that I ran the poll before this YouTube video. So here's the numbers you're seeing right here. So seeing that most of our clients the ones that we work with, ended up as introverts, I decided to take a look to see what the dating numbers were like on if introverts ended up in relationships with other introverts or other extroverts. And the results were really interesting. I ended up stumbling across this research done by YouGov that basically asks, do opposites attract? When it comes to introverts and extroverts, not necessarily. Now, it took me a little while to understand the poll because they display it in kind of a confusing manner, but here's the gist. On average, opposites do not attract. They can and will, but the results ended up like this. If you are completely extroverted, you are overwhelmingly more likely to be dating other people that are also completely extroverted. If you are more introverted, If you are more extroverted than introverted, then you are more likely to date someone who is a little more extroverted than introverted. If you are more introverted than extroverted, then you are more likely to have a partner that is also more introverted than extroverted. If you are completely introverted, then you are more likely not to have a partner at all. Here's my big takeaway. Since it seems a huge portion of our clients consider themselves introverted, that probably also means that their exes are introverted. And we also know from doing polls that the vast majority of our clients believe that their exes are also avoidant. So it does seem to have some merit to the fact that the avoidant introvert combination for most of our clients are what their exes classify themselves as. Now, this is an important concept to understand because it's going to help you understand how you need to alter the value ladder when dealing with an introvert. So let's talk a little bit about that. I think it's super important to give an introvert alone time. So before I showed you this poll that I conducted in 2021, where we found over 70% of participants believe that their exes were avoidant. We know from other internal research that most of our clients exhibit anxious behaviors. And so what usually ends up happening is when the anxious person and the avoidant person get together, there's this self-fulfilling cycle loop where they want someone to love them, they find you, their troubles are over, and then they just self-sabotage the relationship. So this is something I talked a lot about in previous articles and previous videos, so I recommend that you watch those if you want the full accounting of how this self-fulfilling, anxious, and avoidant cycle works. But essentially the main point is that usually during the dating phase, somewhere where you're past the honeymoon period, potentially a little bit, the avoidant gets set off by anxious behaviors in the relationship that you potentially are exhibiting without realizing it. And they use the smallest behavior to self-sabotage the relationship. Of course, the anxious person at that point just continues to dig in and try to fix the problem, which in turn makes the problem bigger, and eventually a breakup occurs. So our goal is to help you communicate in a way so that you can re-attract your introvert ex. But weirdly, the best way to do that is to give them alone time so they can almost get recharged. So here are the major alterations I would make to the value ladder. During the texting phase, I would try to extend your response time between conversations. During the phone call phase, I would definitely harp on the Zeigarnik effect. During the meetup phase, I would encourage you to extend the amount of meetups you go on before you end up going on a romantic date sort of level thing. So let's take a moment and talk a little bit about what each of these things means. So let's first start by extending response time between conversations. So it's important to remember that introverts gain energy and excitement when they are left to their own devices. So sometimes the mistake people make is they get overly excited when things are going well with their introverted ex, that they push things too quickly and don't give them enough space to miss them or even think about the conversation, which can trigger some of their avoidant traits, assuming your ex has that avoidant attachment style. So the first alteration I would make is make sure that when you have a good texting conversation, you give them a little bit more alone time to think about that texting conversation, which I realize for an avoidant or for an anxious attachment style person is an incredibly hard thing to do. Let's move on to the next thing. The next thing is going to happen usually during the phone call phase. So really, we're going to harp on the Zeigarnik effect during the phone call phase. And the Zeigarnik effect essentially states that people are more prone to remember interrupted or incomplete tasks better than completed ones. Since you want your introvert to think about you positively after you're talking on the phone, it's ideal to become better at locating high points of conversations and then quickly ending the conversation after. The thinking here is really simple. An introvert, when they are alone or if they are left on the high of the conversation, that will become their prevailing thought, and they'll be more prone to look at you in a more valuable light, which leads us to the next and final big alteration, which is extend the meetup phase. So the thinking here is simple. Not all introverts need to be alone all the time. In fact, many introverts are more comfortable being around a small group of close friends and family as opposed to a huge group. Think of a marriage proposal as an example. Let's say we have two introverts who get married. They're likely going to opt for a small wedding where they invite their closest friends and family. This is within their comfort zone. So sometimes with an introvert, you don't need to pull out all the stops on this romantic date to try to win them back. For them, the depth of the conversations you're having matter more than anything else. So I'd put more of my focus on ensuring that you're hitting on that depth in conversation during meetup low-risk type dates. And don't forget to end these dates prematurely. The Zeigarnik effect applies here too.